everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Pallas. For this week's show, we are talking about storytelling, and we have two phenomenal storytellers tonight. Thank you for joining us, and I am looking forward to all of your comments and questions. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. If you're on Facebook, grant StreamYard access so we can see your name when you have a comment or a question. Please remember to keep all comments and questions related to the show topic and that this is a safe space. Let's give a shout out to our top sponsors, Ruth, Kirsten, Michelle, Ray, and Heidi. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate you. And if you like the show, you can help support it by going to www.sherrypallas.com. There you will find literally dozens of ways to help and to support me. Thanks in advance, but thank you for welcoming us into your home and joining the conversation. I appreciate you all. Okay, enough housekeeping. Let's meet our guests and get smarter. Sarah Thompson has been many people over the years. Wife, music teacher, different wife, recipe contest slayer, pastry chef, worship leader, and mission fanatic. Now she's a wife for the last time, works in insurance compliance, and gardens for fun. She's always loved all types of storytelling and currently is a co-facilitator of Patrick's monthly open mic telling true personal narratives. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Hi.
I'm so glad to have you here.
So great to be here. Thank you.
And next we have Patrick. Patrick Young earned his BA in sociology in 1997 and his MDiv in 2017. Patrick is the organizer and MC of Java Flix Savannah and Java Flix Buffton and the founder of the Story Arts Workshop. His wife, Sarah, and he produce a monthly storytelling open mic at Hyperion Brewing Company in Jacksonville, Florida. Welcome, Patrick.
Hey.
So let me just say that I met these two last year at the Goose, and I really liked them. But this year, it was kind of like this love friendship. And when I was leaving the Goose, I stood up and shouted, "Goodbye, Goose." And like a Nora Ephron movie, I see Sarah come out and look for me. And I jump out of the car and we run to each other and embrace in this big hug. And at the same time say, "I fucking love you."
I love you, Sherry.
It was
just like a
movie. So when I needed a show for tonight, these two stepped up and are coming on to share their magnificence. They told stories that I may never forget, and that is the purpose of a story, right? So let's start off with how do you let's start off with what is the purpose of storytelling? Sarah, we'll start with you.
Okay. So storytelling can take many different forms. We have stories that have been around since before we were able to write things down, and oral history is how we basically have all or most of our history. Patrick can correct me on that. But the purpose of telling a story, whether it's a folk story or there's a moral at the end, or whether it's a true personal narrative, is to build connections with other people that are listening. It creates connections between people, and it also builds empathy. My worst enemy on the planet might not be my worst enemy on the planet after I hear what their story is. And I can attest to that because
I love that. Yeah. Patrick, what do you think?
Well, humans tell stories all day, every day. Whether it's something you telling your boss what you've been up to today, or if you're sitting around a coffee table talking about this thing that happened when we were in elementary school, and remember the time that fell down off the slide and broke my leg, and stuff like that. But we also use storytelling to communicate our values and our history. We use it to engender empathy and to also to engender agency, personal agency. You think about that iconic moment in Gone with the Wind where Scarlett got to a point where she says, you know, as God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again. People use that kind of device for storytelling all the time, and or to kind of use that as sort of a vision casting for the course of your life. You know, people will classically come to a point where they realize they cannot drink another drop of alcohol in their life, either because they're allergic or because you know, just they know that it's toxic for them in every aspect of their lives. But yeah, and as far as the, I think the empathy is a really big deal for us. As a cishet white guy, I need to know what the Me Too women have gone through. I need to hear the BLM stories. I need to know what life has been like for LGBTQ, et cetera, folks. And
So it even builds a commonality.
yes, yeah. I mean, excuse me. People need to tell stories, but we also need to hear them. You know, in one sense, you can psychologically sort of get something off your chest. Either something's horrible and wrong, and I want to do something about it, or you know, or I'm at my emotional limit with this thing that happened here, or there was a third thing that I had in mind, but it has escaped me.
Well, so I write, and I can write a mean story.
Mhm.
But I really struggle in actually telling it. And at the Wild Goose, I told one of my most embarrassing moment stories. It was nothing like your guys's. It lacked so much that I can't even put my finger on, while it's still a great story. The delivery, the I don't know what I did wrong. So what does it take to tell a good story?
The
Sarah?
first thing I'll tell you is, you know,
Patrick, okay.
knowing that,
Yeah.
knowing that you are a writer and a very intelligent person or a good communicator. I'm going to say practice, practice, practice.
Okay.
The first story that I told badly, and it was badly received, and I kind of realized that I needed to improve my game. But to do that, I had to start my own thing. But you know, you can do anything. I mean, you can gather around a coffee table or on a front porch and tell stories, kind of practice it. You can do it intentionally or you know, off the cuff. But yeah, I would say you need to be able to, one of the things I usually tell people is you need to be able to say, this is the story of, you know, and then fill in your blank, so you can kind of know the central nugget about what this story is, because you might start telling one story and then finish telling a different one. You know, and then maybe
I feel called out here.
So I'm with you. And you know what? Go to like half the listeners right here, because like we are, I think to some extent, we all do that.
Yeah.
Tangents, rabbit holes. And what was I saying? 20 minutes later.
Yeah.
There you have it.
Tangentializing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Sarah, what do you think makes a good story?
I'm learning that firsthand experience. Like if you're telling me about the thing that happened to you, that I think makes a great story. Also, I'm not going to deny this practice thing, and like shave down like what are the high points that you really want your listeners to hear. Like I've learned to cut out a lot of like narrative and scene setting stuff, because it really doesn't contribute to the what actually happened, right? Yeah, if it's a personal narrative, if it's something that happened to you, you can bring in not just the thing that happened, but how you felt about it and what you were thinking about it at the time, etc. And we kind of, your listeners get a glimpse into the you of that moment. I think that makes a brilliant story, because you get a little vulnerable place.
Yeah, and that vulnerability is, I think, what it is. Because as you're speaking, I'm thinking I get nervous in front of crowds, and people who are watching this show would be like, what? But, you know, getting out there, I hear my mother get to the point. I hear my boss bullet points, Sherry, you know, all of those things to just get that information out. When I'm writing, I can be poetic. I can add those things. I can add in, there's a less of a vulnerability there. So, I mean, I think you have to be kind of a badass to get up in front of people and knowing that they're going to judge you, but to do it anyway. So, I mean, you guys are truly badasses in my book.
Well, I mean, it's being a badass enough, I think, to put yourself in a spotlight where you then peel off your badassery and go, look, I'm naked.
Ah, yeah.
Hey, this is uncomfortable, and yeah.
But good news, folks. So are you. You know.
Yeah.
Exactly. Everybody's got that badass in them somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, the story, it was supposed to be like a story hour at the Goose, but it went on to like midnight when the rains hit on Saturday night. So, I mean, it was just such a pleasure. And I took pictures of everybody watching you guys, and whether or not they were enthralled or who else got up and where their captivation was. And I saw laughter of tears with you, Sarah, and I saw genuine tears with your story, Patrick. So to be able to move people in those types of ways, I think takes more than practice, right? Isn't there a talent there?
It takes life. I mean, it takes your emotional connection with the events of your life. And one of the things that, storytellers need to do is to connect feeling with their story, or else you're just communicating data. Now, depending on how vividly you're telling your story, that as you're processing it yourself, you can kind of well up, like what I was telling you about my friend Victoria. There was heartbreak, and then there was heartbreak because things didn't go well for her. But anyway, the feeling needs to be communicated.
Again, that vulnerability. And timing for the comedy, right? I mean, Sarah, you had everybody in tears laughing so hard over your story about some friends. Not you, but some friends.
Totally wasn't me.
Yeah. Slipping someone else on the it was summer camp, right? Trip?
It was a ski trip camp, so like winter camp. But accidentally poisoned my then boyfriend.
Yeah. I mean, tears of laughter. It was just to be able to move someone like that. I mean, that's the goal of this show, is to have that type of vulnerability to tell these types of stories so people feel. I just ask the questions. You guys are, up there actually doing the work, telling these stories, making perfect strangers feel. I mean, like I said, laughter, just crying from laughter from your story as you're acting it out, which was classic. That I couldn't do it. I really couldn't do it. I mean, when I opened my mouth and said, I'll tell you my most embarrassing story, the story didn't embarrass me. Me telling the story embarrassed me again. Like, how quickly can I get through this and just say this and then go on, without really feeling it, without really saying, oh my God, I was so embarrassed. But you guys have that.
Well, it kind of does bring up something interesting. I've been telling that story for 35 years.
Oh my God.
I'm pretty sure it happened like around 35 years ago. And it kills at parties. Kills, right? And so I just never stopped telling it. And it wasn't until this time when somebody knows the story.
Yeah, that's Greg Larson.
User just commented with emojis that are totally appropriate.
Yes.
It wasn't until I told the story this time, when I started telling the story, when I started with the story arts workshop with Patrick, and I was like, oh, and tell the story, kills at parties. And I started telling it, and it was at an X-Files, the storytelling that we have around Valentine's Day, where you dish on your crazy ex.
Oh, perfect.
And so I was like, oh, perfect. And the more I started to flesh out the story, the more I found out, like, I was the crazy ex. because he's always been the villain of that story. And it wasn't until I was telling it 2 Saturday nights ago that somebody jumped up like 5 minutes in and was like, so what did he do to make him so obnoxious? And I was like, I mean, I'm sure I could have gone back in my files and said things, but I'm like, you know what, at the end of the day, the narrative is 35 years later. The narrative is still tweaking itself. It's still changing. So it's like, it's not enough that I experienced it. I'm still processing it. And now I'm to the point where like, he's not only not a villain, he was just a jerk that didn't deserve to get poisoned by my church. No, but
yeah, I mean, yeah,
that was it was embarrassing to tell and to finally be there like, I don't know.
I wonder what story he tells.
I would love to hear it. Honestly, I don't want him anywhere near where I'm telling stories about him.
No. But when I think of stories that really change things, I think of the book ban. I think of Anne Frank. I mean, Anne Frank's story has come into our lives and really put a face and a narrative onto the Holocaust. We hear, you know, the Bible is all stories, and yet that's caused more wars than anything. So these stories, like you said, really tie us to other people. Again, I don't remember all the logistics of the stories. I was in and out of everything happening, but I will remember those 2 stories that you guys told that just affected me. Like I said, either happiness or tears. I mean, Patrick, after yours, I was like, I can't take this shit anymore. I'm going out and going to bed. I was so sad. I mean, but that's okay though, right? Because it's a sad story. You're supposed to be sad with those types of things. There's happy stories, there's sad stories. I
sometimes have a little bit of guilt. Every now and then I'll tell a story that I think it's a good story, you know, and I enjoy telling it. And I know people who are good storytellers who are like, well, I'm not going after that fucking one, you know.
Actually, I take it back. It wasn't your story that sent me to bed. It was Greg's. Greg. It was, I mean, it was like, okay, my emotions can't take anymore. I'm going to bed and, you know, with tears in my eyes, and I feel closer to Greg. I feel closer to you guys because of that vulnerability.
Yeah.
Maybe not in reverse, because again, I couldn't tell the story.
His story was a whopper because he had us all in stitches and tears telling us about this friend that had lost his life, you know, ultimately. But this is one of the memories that we have together. And it's like we rode that whole roller coaster of just hilarity and sorrow.
Yep.
Just it was
a surprise musical interlude.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's Greg's response right there. It opened with, I'm going to tell you about my friend dying. And then I was like, why did he even say that halfway through? And not even, oh my God, the wraparound of him coming back and then the death. I just couldn't take it. But that's what makes the good stories. I mean, that, you know, like I look at books and whatever's going to make me feel, whether again, if it's happiness or sadness, that's what I want to get into, is just feeling those emotions. Okay. So what is your favorite story that you guys have done? Is there one that sticks out, or is there one that you don't want to ever do again?
I have stories that I don't ever want to do again.
Really?
That I thought were going to be like hard hitting, and then I tell them and I'm like, just either they didn't land correctly or there was crickets, or at the afterwards I'm just like, no, I shouldn't. Why did I try to make myself appear as something that I'm really not? And yeah, those stories are like, I'm gonna put this back on the shelf.
Yeah,
another time.
Like mine.
No love. I love that you shared it. I do. I love that you did. there was such vulnerability in there, and
yeah. I mean, I think that it's talent. You know, some people can't write. Some people, you know, and I can write it down. I've said since I was a child, I write better than I speak. But again, that vulnerability, even, I mean, you're saying that you had stories that you would never tell again because they weren't received well. I would end up in a corner crying. Like, I mean, just the fact that you guys get back up there and try again is just phenomenal.
Part of it is that I have to.
It doesn't make you.
Storytelling with Patrick was like, well, that went like shit. Guess I'll try this again in a month. I'll try to do better next time or whatever. But yeah,
I've told
favorites, though.
I've told 1 to 2 stories per month for about 7 years now, and there are reruns, and there are things that you learn to tell differently. When we did a little how-to seminar at the Goose, I told a different version of a story that I had told previously on stage and into microphones, and some people didn't care for some of the features of that story. Because I'm kind of a little bit of a villain in the story, honestly. But I left out some of the gory details, and people were much more receptive to it. But also, to be fair, Sarah, for the first couple of years, I had her starting because I know she's a solid storyteller. Let's have her go. But one of the things that we've learned over the years is to actually start maybe a half an hour before you say you're going to. I mean, start half an hour after you say you're going to. I usually say our show starts at 7, and we really started at 7:30. Because if we said it really starts at 7:30, people will turn up at 8.
Oh yeah.
So Sarah would kind of get run over on the inbound crowd, and other people who were at the bar and stuff like that. But yeah, her stories are excellent. She is the star of the show. And
boss bitch. Yeah. Boss bitch.
And I'm sure almost every story that you've told, you can revisit and revamp and knock it out of the park. So
thank you.
Same for you, Sherry.
So we have 40 minutes. Is that enough time for you both to tell a story? You think so? Can you get it in there? Sarah, you want to go first?
We usually leave a guide of 5 to 7 minutes, and then everybody goes between,
okay. So let's do that.
8.5. So yeah.
Okay.
Are you ready to list?
Lay it on us. Lay it on us.
All right, I just need a belt. Hang on, I'm gonna need to adjust my.
Tim is saying
that's a.
They call me that because badass bitch.
Perfect.
My first
I
one,
love that, Tim.
I got a big old tattoo on my back at the tattoo tent, and I missed Beer and Hymns that like our group was hosting. And so I rolled up when there's 5 minutes left of Beer and Hymns, and everybody was like, "Where the hell have you been?" And I was like, "Check it out." Everybody's just, it's 6 p.m. Everybody's just beer soaked and happy. And Jan was just like, "Did you get a tattoo?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's huge." And she's like, "You are a badass bitch. I'm just going to call you Babs from now on." And I was like, "I'll take it."
There you go.
Because it wasn't painful at all, and I didn't cry a little bit. But, okay, so a story. Oh, Patrick, I love you. Okay.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Here we go. I think he knows what's going to happen next. Okay. He sang to me only one time. And it was when we weren't together that long yet. Patrick and I had met online on OkCupid in 2015, and we started dating October 31st, 2015. So by the time like the following spring rolled around, at this point we're like visiting each other in our respective cities. When we first started dating, we would meet halfway between our respective cities in the city of Brunswick, Georgia, the romance capital of Ware County. And so the following spring, it was a lot of him coming down to visit me in Jacksonville, and me going up to visit him in South Carolina. And this was one of those trips where we were in South Carolina. and visiting him, and we're just newly in love, and we're, you know, we're enjoying the time that we have together, knowing that anytime we were together, it had to be a very intentional meeting. It had to be a lot of plans take place. It had to be a pet sitter. It had to be one of us driving 2.5 hours. It had to be everything falling into place. So every date we had was very, very, I don't know how else to say it, intentional. And so we would just soak up each other's company every time we were together. And this trip to Bluffton was no different. I think we had a Java Flix, which was our movie discussion group, in Savannah the night before, and the next day was Saturday, or something like that. We got up in the morning, and he wanted to take me to the Sugary Cafe, and it's a little breakfast nook run by friends of his, and they can bake, oh my gosh, they make the best everything. And I learned to love their whole menu, but what I really learned to love was their breakfast bagel sandwiches. You can get like an everything bagel or an onion bagel, and you could ask for like a scrambled egg folded over on it, and maybe some bacon or ham or sausage, and you put a slice of cheese in it and toast it just fine, and it's just move mountains with that. And so we went and we had our breakfast bagel sandwiches that morning, and a nice hearty cup of coffee. And then maybe we split a donut. Maybe we each got our own donut afterwards. Whatever happened, it was lovely. So when you eat that giant breakfast, you gotta like walk it off. So we went to a nature preserve. It wasn't anywhere close to his home, but it was beautiful. It was springtime, so the flowers were blooming and the bees are buzzing and everything's just sort of waking up out of the winter hibernation. And we're walking along, and we feel what we've eaten for breakfast and the coffee and everything's just sort of like processing, like
okay.
Nothing. And we're new in the relationship, we're newly in love, and so nobody's saying anything in anything less than poetic forms. And we're both thinking like, oh, I have to visit the powder room soon. Or he says, I must get over water soon. And we're just going to dance around the anatomical terms of what we each need to do, but we're both feeling it. So we're like, let's cut our walk short and let's go back to the house, and we can visit the powder room. Water. This is cute. And so we hyphen it back to the car, get in the car, we're on the way back to Bluffton. And it had to be 400 miles at least, because we really both really like are feeling it now, but neither one of us is saying anything. All right, and he's driving, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and he's just hand on the wheel, and he's trying not to think about his colon, which is and I'm over here like scrolling Facebook. I'm trying not to think about Mike is also talking to me. We're just like, oh, what is this? And I'm scrolling Facebook, just doom scrolling, and I run across a post. And God, I don't remember who posted it, but it was a quote of Glennon Doyle and what she had to say about Mother Teresa. And I know the way that she said it, I mean, it had a whole different context, but the quote went something like, about Mother Teresa, when she wanted to see the face of God, she didn't look up or around. She turned and looked at the person next to her, because that is the divine image. And I read that, and I know that she's saying that about Mother Teresa and about like her work and all of the things that she did to help people, and how she was with the vulnerable and the outcasts and marginalized people. And I know that, but like in that moment, the person sitting next to me in the car was somebody who was so incredibly beautiful to me. I loved him like I didn't know that I was capable of loving somebody.
Aww.
Like this relationship was so new, and it was huge. It was earth moving. And I just swelled up with love, so much love for him. And I thought to myself, I'm going to turn and I'm going to look at the person next to me and I'm going to see the face of God. And it's going to be fantastic. And so I'm just giddy and I'm almost in tears. And I put down the phone and I look at Patrick and he looks back at me and there is the face of God. And he's saying to me, not a whole song, not even like a whole verse. It was 4 words. He sang, "Going home, gonna poop." I was like, put a baby in me now. Like, that's when I knew that, as if I didn't know beforehand, I knew then that I met the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
Yay. Oh my God. Again, another story. Patrick, I'm not your wife, but I really hope to hear this song one time. I really do hope to hear Next Goose. We're all sitting by the pool and you look over and say, I got to go home and got to poop.
It all goes back to improv, where you get to know a song, and you know the melody, and you just kind of sing what's on your mind to the melody.
Okay.
It took me years to figure this out, but the melody was actually Maroon 5's "Sugar." You know, sugar, you're sweet, blah blah, something something something. But it was going home, gonna poop. And I don't know that it did or needed to continue.
And Mother Teresa was the furthest thing from Mother who? No. Yep.
But props to MT and Glennon Doyle. Cheers, y'all. There we go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, Patrick, let me see if I can move you. There we go.
Yep.
Oof.
Your turn. I love
right.
these
Well,
stories. Hey, aren't they great storytellers?
I'm tempted to tell a better version of the first story that I told. The first time I told a story, I was staying with a friend of mine, George Doherty, up in Philly. He had told a story at the First Person Arts Story Slam. And I was like, what's a story slam? He's like, oh, you tell a story. It's competitive. You can win a prize. And he told a story and he won the story slam and he won the prize. So when I went to visit him at this one year in 2010, actually, I really wanted to tell a story, and I knew that there was a slam coming up. But he kind of came over to me. He's like, "Hey, there's a story slam tonight. Do you want to tell a story?" And in Philadelphia, especially when your friend invites you to do something that you kind of want to do, it sort of has this implicit, as someone at the Goose gave me the phrase, comma chicken, but that's not how you would say that in Philly. But anyways, I'm like, yeah. So he and I were sitting at his house all day, and we're working on the story. He kind of knew when to stop. I didn't, but I was kind of obsessing about all the details of my story. So we went to the story slam. They pulled my name out of the hat. They announced my name, and I thought, I was like, yeah, I prepared for this, but I'm also like, I'm so ready not to tell this story. But I was really intimidated. There were a whole lot of really good storytellers. And a lot of them were beautiful young women who were wearing these very low plunging neckline dresses and were lovely. And so I walked up to the microphone in all my semi-overweight, early 40s glory. And I'm like, hi, and kind of being slinky with the microphone a little bit. But I was just so insecure. And but I told a story about when I used to work in a sheltered workshop for adults with developmental disabilities and special needs. one of the things that happens with people with developmental disabilities and special needs is they are fully functional sexual beings, just like all of us are. And one of people's favorite things to do with people with developmental disabilities and special needs is to not think about them and or forget about them and deny their humanity. I've maintained that those folks are the most marginalized people in American society, if not globally. Now, the people who were in our sheltered workshop had it pretty good. They were cared for in community group homes, some of them in their own homes. Some of them had private care in the homes where they grew up. But it can be hard for romance to blossom in all these different situations. In part because people are afraid of liability, in part because people figure that, oh, these are their angels, these are their eternal child, and you don't want to think about biological drives for these folks. Sorry, it's kind of turning into a TED Talk. Anyway, but so here I was working at this workshop where we taught job skills to these folks, and it was a really interesting, amazingly diverse group, both in terms of levels of human functionality, both for the staff and the cultural diversity and the various things that people had going on cognitively and biologically and stuff like that. But there were a handful of folks who were able to date, and there were a handful of folks who were able to find out about contraceptives. Some were on the pill, some knew how to put on a condom, and some would occasionally consensually sneak out of the cafeteria at lunchtime and go into one of the bathrooms, and those nice rails on the handicapped stalls, they would make use of those.
Okay.
But anyway, there was now, how at some point in your life, that you're not supposed to date the people that you work with, but you do anyway. I was in a place socially and religiously where it's like all of my theology, all of my philosophy, all of my higher academic whatnot was in conflict with what my body wanted in my this was actually, I guess I was in my 30s. The story happened in my 30s. I started telling the story in my 40s. Rewind a little. Okay. So there was a gal there, very diverse population, a gal named Inga. She was from Latvia, and she had lovely blue eyes, and she had what I called the kind of curves that only the failing abundance of nutrition in the Soviet failing economy could produce. But she was lovely. She was very lonely, and she was looking hard for a friend, just a friend. And I was looking hard for not just a friend. And we were pals at work, but it was kind of like, she's like, I've got to just have a friend. And I'm like, having a hard time dealing with my higher functions and my lower functions. And kind of came to a place where it was shitty of me, where she was like, I just need a friend. And I'm just like, I just need to, I didn't say I just need to get laid, but that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I just kind of knew that as religiously involved as I was, it couldn't happen that way. Or, a lot of people give lip service to it, but in any case, but I kind of told her, I'm like, look, I'm really desperate for more than friendship. And she just needed a solid friend. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, but I can't do this right now. And that was a horrible thing to say. It feels horrible to say now. But in any case, we had that conversation. And then at work one day, the phone rings. Phone used to be on the wall of the program area. Hello, because it was an actual physical phone instead of just a little slate slab thing. But
Showing your age.
it happens. And Patrick, this is Inga. Come and see Joe. He's having a hard time. And I'm like thinking, is she just trying to get me to come down to talk with her? I mean, Joe was a sweet guy. Like we called him Birthday Joe because he was functioning on the spectrum where he would take a piece of information in and he would remember it forever. And he was really into birthdays. So you could tell him your birthday, and on your birthday, he would come right to you and tell you happy birthday. And he would be so happy and proud that he knew your birthday and he got to say happy birthday to you first or at some point. But I said, hey, Joe, my mother's birthday is March 8th. Tell me a week ahead of time so I can go get her a card. And without fail, for 3 years, Joe came to me 1 week before March 8th and said, it's your mother's birthday on March 8th. And but anyway, sweet guy. And he even sang happy birthday to my mom. But I'd call my mom like, hey, Mom, listen to this. And Joe would sing very monotone, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. And sweet guy from this population where they have some troubles expressing themselves socially, emotionally, physically, and sexually. But eventually I went down, I started walking down to Inga's program area, and I heard someone screaming out of Inga's program area. So I'm trucking on down the rest of the way, and I see Joe, my happy birthday Joe, just pounding on this one young woman. And the young woman was yelling. She sat at the table and didn't do anything but sit there and get pounded and yell. She didn't hit herself or anything like that. And we got Joe away from her. We sat him down. A bunch of other male staff came in and kind of were piling around. We're in a circle around Joe. And we were talking to Joe. We're like, what are you doing? What, it's so out of character. That aggression was so out of character for him.
Yeah.
And as it happened, the young woman that he was hurting was sexually active and had turned Joe down, as anybody's free to do, with a would-be suitor. Joe's social and emotional skill set was such that he just was so frustrated. And, here I am justifying sexual assault, essentially, but not that I want to do that at all, but it's kind of like from his perspective, I have to step in his shoes a little bit. We're like, Joe, what's going on? Why did you do this? Why are you hurting your friend? He did this one thing they call perseveration, where he just kind of backed up, checked out, and sort of had a nervous response. He would curl his fingers up and just kind of stare at it. And we're trying to ask him a question. It's like, nope, all the universe was him and this little curled up finger. We're like, Joe, come on, we need to understand what's going on here. Please tell us what's going on. And he goes, I can't tell you. I'm like, Joe, we're not going to know what's going on unless you tell us. It's really important that we understand you. And he goes, you don't know what I want. I'm like, Joe, tell us what you want. We need to know. And then just at the top of his lungs, he yells, I want some pussy.
Oh my God.
We were all very tense and all very professional. And we hit the deck laughing because we never expected to hear that coming out of his mouth. And part of me thought, Joe, I think I understand. You can't go hitting people, but I'm right there with you, man. Um, and so that's that.
Wow. Wow. So where's Joe now? Happily married, hopefully?
I would imagine not. He was in the same program in the same area with the same person. I think they found some rapprochement, but I haven't been up that way for in that particular location for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. So I couldn't really tell you.
Now people like that get guns. So let's,
No,
yeah.
I don't think he would. I don't think he would get a gun.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Being sexually frustrated sucks, but yeah, no violence.
Yes. Violence is still violence.
Violence is still violence. Yes.
And if you somehow actually want to hear the original version of that story, it's still on YouTube.
Oh dear. Okay.
I won't send everybody the link in the chat afterwards.
Yeah. Well,
he put a link in the Wild Goose Festival bio. So it's like anybody that was going to our session at the Wild Goose Festival was able to read about him, about us, and also see a link to that story. So
the link's in my horrible first story. Yeah. And
hashtag vulnerable. I
don't feel so bad about my story now.
See? And neither do I about it. It takes sometimes years to flesh these things out.
Right?
Yeah.
So what do you, is there there's a formula for music. There's a formula for books and what type of genre you're looking for. Like a memoir has the arc and then lets you, gets you up and then brings you down. Is that one of the techniques that is so needed for the story?
I usually recommend to people, especially for early storytellers in their storytelling careers, what they call the 5 beats. You may well have the same, know the 5 beats from your writing experience. If at some point, I remember thinking about hearing in grade school, a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then at some point later on, realizing that is so uninformative.
Right.
But that beginning, middle, end goes back to like Democritus, I think, like some old dead Greek guy. And then it was kind of bumped up to 5 points with a little bit more specificity, theoretically by Shakespeare, where the 5 beats are the setup, where you set the scene with as little detail as possible, the inciting incident, what lit problem, lit off your conflict, the third one is the rising action. Your emotional stakes are getting more tense, and you're kind of following your cognitive processing of what's making you more and more wound up, or more in love, or more embarrassed.
The crescendo, right? That's the crescendo.
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay.
The fourth one is the main event. That's where your climax is, and you kind of have to say what happened to your emotional stakes, and then the resolution, what happened going forward. Those are sort of 5 basic storytelling things that we usually recommend to people. Also, the thing that I mentioned earlier, saying this is the story of, that kind of helps you focus on the heart of your story. The Moth, sort of the creme de la creme of storytelling, they recommend having a really good first line and a really good last line to put your story to bed. I'm okay with the first line, but I'm spent by the time I come to the end of my stories usually, and I rarely land it with a good last line.
So we wouldn't have religion without stories. We wouldn't have history without stories. And I think it's just so important because that is the way that you relate. I mean, that the communication level that comes with stories, even if one person is only doing the talking, That's what I was saying about your guys' stories at the Wild Goose. You brought us in there. You gave us that emotion. Anne Frank did the same thing with her diary. Books can do the same thing. John Grisham gets me into a very big social justice mood, those types of things. But our societies, our communities, everything that we know since the cuneiform writing is all story based. It's whether or not you have the ability. In fact, technically, this show is story based. Come tell your story, let other people know, so you can learn, grow, empathize, all of those things. So without our own stories, even though I struggle in telling because there's far too many most embarrassing stories that I have.
I want to hear them all.
Yeah.
I will.
It's like the very first really embarrassing story I have. I mean, I love telling it because it's just so funny. I was feeling like such an idiot over and over again. Like I didn't just stop with just one. I did it over and over again. But that's where friendships, that's where relationships are built. The song of 4 words of the song of I'm Gonna Go Poo is when you know, in love with him. So now you can tell that story. I just love it. I just absolutely love it.
I foresee Sherry telling a story on the Moth main stage, as well as at Risk. Risk does, I think, 1 or 2 shows a month in LA, and Risk is one of my favorite storytelling shows. And come on, I mean, you've got the pressure. I don't know. You've got the charisma, you've got the stories, you've got the embarrassment. You're ready, Sherry.
Oh my gosh!
Hit that.
You got
hit that stage.
We gotta connect you with Risk.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me go ahead and practice. I will tell the audience, since we've been beating around the bush, my most embarrassing story. Actually, like I said, it was just my first. I was 21 years old. I was a single mother, and I was going to work in the morning. And I got in my car, and as I pulled out the driveway, there was a whole bunch of construction people there. And one by one, they all turned to look at me. I pulled out, and more down the sidewalk. I'm driving down. They started to point at me, smile. I'm like, oh my God, I must look amazing today. Flip down my mirror, look in the mirror, and I'm wearing those dark Ray-Ban glasses, and I'm missing one of the lens. So they were pointing at me because all I could see is this big blue dot. And like, that wasn't the worst. Years later, I was at lunch with a customer, and for some reason, this story came up. So I told him, as we were walking out of lunch, it happened again. And he said to me, Sherry, you're missing your lens again. And I went like this immediately. Oh my God. And he turns, he goes, but this time you have broccoli in your teeth too. Oops. Yeah, you know, I am professional. I am out there, and I make an ass out of myself all the time. So yeah, I'm sure that, you know, I if I learned how to do storytelling, I could write that story like phenomenal. But, you know, to be able to tell it, it's difficult.
Well, you just did the heck out of it now. Okay. And when we were together a couple weeks ago. But
what's that?
And when we were together a couple weeks ago, we were the thing that resonates with me is like you know, you walk out the door, you're turning heads, you're like, I still got this.
I'm looking great today.
Amazing. Heck yeah. And that will like elevate you, like, yeah, I'm feeling myself. That's what's happening. Only to be brought down.
Oh my God. I mean, like, those construction crews were there for like a week. And after that, I just held my head. Every time I pulled out, I just put my head down, you know, like, oh my God, please don't. Please don't see me again. Or I've got new glasses. Look.
Right. I fixed it. Brush my teeth again.
Yeah. But I mean, it's like some people think that, you know, oh, well, you know, what, you know, oh, well, you wouldn't have any of those stories. I've got tons. I've got tons of, like, I have been it's like a pastime of mine that I embarrass myself on a regular basis. And Heidi, who has known me for 30 years, I'm surprised she's quiet right now because she would have some of those stories too.
Hi, Heidi.
Hi, Heidi.
Let's keep her quiet.
But that's just, it's so wonderful. It's no wonderful. It's such a wonderful juxtaposition to meet you and be like, here's this goddess, right? Who's like and you're like, you are so put together and you are so just, everything is in the right place. And then you smile and you got a big chunk of broccoli in your teeth. Like, God, dang it. It was beautiful, Sherry. Beautiful. Like,
it was right up front. I got in the car. And I had driven, so I had to be in the car with this customer afterwards. I was just fucking mortified. Like my famous embarrassing story just got worse. And so now it's 2.
It's a double hitter.
Right. I couldn't have just ended with the 1. I had to add another one. Well, we are at the top of the hour. Is there any final words or advice you'd like to give, and where can people find you? Patrick, you go first.
Okay. Well, the first thing to say is you, Sherry, and everyone else, your life is built of stories. That's how you think of yourself in some senses. I couldn't tell you how many times I've tried to get people to tell stories, and they're like, well, I don't have any stories to tell. And, my internal response, I was professionally weaned in warehouses outside of Philadelphia. My internal response is bullshit, but that's not going to usually coax stories out of people. Everybody has stories. It's just a matter of putting them together, being brave enough to step up and tell them. And, people's fear of public speaking is a paper tiger. And do you know what you need to do with all the paper tigers in your life?
Burn them.
Kill them. Cut them up. Throw them in the fireplace. Tell your stories, because you need to tell your stories as much as everybody else needs to hear them. Find storytelling events near you. Find some podcasts. There are plenty of them. And tell your stories.
I love that. Where can people find you?
On Facebook, we are the Story Arts Workshop, and so are you. It's always the tagline, because you're a human being as well. You've got stories, and you might as well tell them. And there's a Facebook page called the Story Arts Workshop. There's sort of a play on the drama masks with emojis, like 2 colons with a parenthesis in the middle.
I like that.
And that's where we post our events. And you can find us there. You can find me personally, Patrick Young, on Facebook. Email address associated with that is skywhale2003@yahoo.com. Be happy to yap and carry on with anybody about storytelling.
All of their links are in Facebook, and they will be updated on YouTube also. Sarah, my love. Any final words, and where can people find you?
I don't have anything better to say than what Patrick just said.
Right?
Just telling your stories, tell them to yourself. You find out a lot about yourself when you tell your story to somebody else. Even if you've been telling it for 35 years, and then you realize, oh, I probably need to fill in some blanks here to be informative. But yeah, I co-sign everything Patrick just said, and I'm part of the Story Arts Workshop. I'm an admin on the Facebook page, the Story Arts Workshop. So when you send something to us, one of us is going to see it, or we'll see it. I'm on Facebook under Sarah Thompson. If you find Patrick, you'll find me. Instagram at that foul wench. Whole different story.
I love all your email, that fat wench. I love it. I love it. I was like, you go, girl.
Patrick hates it. I've heard that nickname longer than I've known him by like.
Her ass is amazing, and she owes herself more positive self-talk than that. Thank you very much.
We can take pride in being a wench.
Hey,
whatever.
It's a self-given title, so I'm fine. But yes, come see us, come visit us, tell your story one way or another.
Beautiful. Well, I'm going to send you guys backstage. Thank you so very much for your stories and your wisdom and the laughs. I love it.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I hope you guys took into consideration about your stories. Your whole life is a story. And when you tell your stories, you find your tribe. When you tell your stories, you find out who you are, like Sarah said. So tell your stories, come on the show, do these types of things. Even if you're not here, tell your neighbor, tell your family, your stories are who you are. I will see you next week. Next week, I believe we are doing the second show on the death penalty. I've got another guest coming on, and it should be phenomenal. So, as always, no matter what you do, always walk in love. I'll see you next week. Mwah! Bye.